Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at the Minotaurs I will be using in my Chaos Dwarf Army. But before we start, be sure to like, share, subscribe and ring the Tallyman's bell so you don't miss an update. In Greek mythology, the Minotaur is a mythical creature portrayed in classical times with the head and tail of a bull and the body of a man, or, as described by Roman poet Ovid, a being part man and part bull. It dwelt at the centre of the labyrinth, which was an elaborate maze-like construction designed by the architect Daedalus and his son Icarus, on the command of King Minos of Crete. The Minotaur was eventually killed by the Athenian hero Theseus. As you can see, this description lends itself intimately to being part of a Chaos Dwarf Army. Their worship of the bronze bull in Hashut's name would naturally allow Minotaurs a place in the army. In fact, I'm quite surprised with all the bull motifs that they didn't actually feature in the army list at all originally, and only now that I've come to think of it more closely that they really should be included. The word Minotaur derives from the ancient Greek as a compound of the name Minos and the noun bull, translated as the Bull of Minos. In Crete, the Minotaur was known by the name Asterion, a name shared with Minos' foster father. Minotaur was originally a proper noun in reference to this mythical figure. The use of Minotaur as a common noun to refer to members of a generic species of bull-headed creatures developed much later, in 20th century fantasy genre fiction and in games such as D&D and Warhammer. After ascending the throne of the island of Crete, Minos competed with his brothers as ruler. Minos prayed to the sea god Poseidon to send him a snow-white bull as a sign of the god's favour. Minos was to sacrifice the bull to honour Poseidon, but owing to the bull's beauty, he decided instead to keep him. Minos believed that the god would accept a suitable sacrifice. To punish Minos, Poseidon made Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. Pasiphae had the craftsman, Daedalus, fashion a hollow wooden cow which she climbed into in order to mate with the bull. The monstrous Minotaur was the result. Pasiphae nursed the Minotaur, but as he grew in size he became ferocious. As the unnatural offspring of a woman and a beast, the Minotaur had no natural source of nourishment and thus devoured humans for sustenance. Minos, following advice from the oracle at Delphi, had Daedalus construct a gigantic labyrinth to hold the Minotaur. Its location was near Minos' palace in Knossos. The Minotaur is commonly represented in classical art with the body of a man and the head and tail of a bull. According to Sophocles' Trachinae, when the river spirit Aeschylus seduced Inaria, one of the guises he assumed was a man with the head of a bull. From classical times through the Renaissance, the Minotaur appears at the centre of many depictions of the labyrinth. Ovid's Latin account of the Minotaur, which did not describe which half was bull and which half was man, was the most widely available during the Middle Ages, and several later versions show a man's head and torso on a bull's body, the reverse of the classical configuration, reminiscent of a centaur. This alternative tradition survived into the Renaissance, and still figures in some modern depictions such as Steel Savage's illustrations for Edith Hamilton's Mythology, 1942, and, of course, the Chaos Dwarf Bull Centaurs as part of the Games Workshop franchise. Androgeus, son of Minos, had been killed by the Athenians, who were jealous of the victories he had won at the Panathenaic festival. Others say he was killed at Marathon by the Cretan bull, his mother's former Taurine lover, who Aegus, king of Athens, had commanded him to slay. The common tradition holds that Minos waged and won a war to avenge the death of his son. Catullus, in his account of the Minotaur's birth, which refers to another version in which Athens was compelled by the cruel plague to pay penalties for the killing of Androgeus. Aegus had to avert the plague caused by his crime by sending young men at the same time as the best of unwed girls as a feast to the Minotaur. Minos required that 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens drawn by lots be sent every 7th or 9th year, some accounts say every year, to be devoured by the Minotaur. When the 3rd sacrifice approached, Theseus volunteered to slay the monster. He promised his father Aegus that he would put up a white sail on his journey back home if he was successful, but would have the crew put up black sails if he was killed. In Crete, Minos' daughter Ariadne fell madly in love with Theseus and helped him navigate the labyrinth. In most accounts, she gave him a ball of thread, allowing him to retrace his path. Theseus killed the Minotaur with the sword of Aegus and led the other Athenians back out of the labyrinth. On the way home, Theseus abandoned Ariadne on the island of Naxos and continued. He neglected, however, to put up the white sail. King Aegus, from his lookout on Cape Sounion, saw the black-sailed ship approach and, presuming his son dead, committed suicide by throwing himself into the sea that is since named after him. This act secured the throne for Theseus. The view of the Minotaur as the antagonist of Theseus reflects the literary sources, which are biased in favour of the Athenian perspectives. The Etruscans, who paired Ariadne with Dionysus, never with Theseus, offered an alternative view, never seen in Greek arts. On their red figure wine cups of the early to mid-4th century, Pasiphae tenderly cradles an infant Minotaur on her knee. The contest between Theseus and the Minotaur was frequently represented in Greek art. A Gnosian didrygam exhibits on one side the labyrinth, on the other the Minotaur, surrounded by a semicircle of small balls, probably intended for stars. One of the monster's names was Asterion. When the ruins of Minos' palace at Knossos were discovered, the labyrinth never was. The multiplicity of rooms, staircases and corridors in the palace has led some archaeologists to suggest that the palace itself was the source of the labyrinth myth, an idea that is now generally discredited. Homer, describing the shield of Achilles, remarked that Daedalus had constructed a ceremonial dancing ground for Ariadne, but does not associate this with the term labyrinth. Some modern mythologists regard the Minotaur as a solar personification and a Minoan adaptation of the Baal Moloch of the Phoenicians. The slaying of the Minotaur by Theseus, in that case, indicates the breaking of Athenian tributary relations with Minoan Crete. According to A.B. Cook, Minos and Minotaur were different forms of the same personage, representing the sun god of the Cretans, who depicted the sun as a bull. He and J.G. Fraser both explain Pasiphae's union with the bull as a sacred ceremony, at which the queen of Knossos was wedded to a bull-formed god, just as the wife of the tyrant in Athens was wedded to Dionysus. E. Pottier, who does not dispute the historical personality of Minos, in view of the story of Phalaris, considers it probable that in Crete, where a bull cult may have existed by the side of that of the Liberus, victims were tortured by being shut up in the belly of a red-hot brazen bull. The story of Talos, the Cretan man of brass, who heated himself red-hot and clasped strangers in his embrace as soon as they landed on the island, is probably of similar origin. As you can see, we are starting to draw parallels with Chaos Dwarf mythology and story. A historical explanation of the myth refers to the time when Crete was the main political and cultural potency in the Aegean Sea. As the fledgling Athens, and probably other continental Greek cities, was under tribute to Crete, it can be assumed that such tribute included young men and women for sacrifice. This ceremony was performed by a priest disguised with a bull head or mask, thus explaining the imagery of the Minotaur. Once continental Greece was free from Crete's dominance, the myth of the Minotaur worked to distance the forming religious consciousness of the Hellene polis from the Minoan beliefs. A scientific interpretation also exists. Citing earlier descriptions of the Minotaur by Callimachus, as being entirely focused on the cruel bellowing it made from its underground labyrinth and extensive tectonic activity in the region. Science journalist Matt Kaplan has theorized that the myth may well stem from geology. He points out that carbon dating of marine fossils attached to boulders that were ejected from the ocean by ancient tsunamis indicates the region was tectonically very active during the years when the Minotaur myth first appeared. Given this, he argues that the Minoans used the monster to help explain the terrifying earthquakes that were bellowing beneath their feet. Food for thought, I think you will agree. I find it fascinating that we can draw so much from ancient history into what we regard today as modern mythology. The Chaos Dwarfs have clearly benefited from this retelling and modification of our own history. What parallels have you noticed while collecting your own armies? Leave a comment below. To that end, I'd like to end this video there and open up the comments to you. Be sure to like, share, subscribe and ring the Tallyman's bell so you can keep up to date. Peace.